think we can start by mentioning that many of you were at the Lights for Liberty last Friday at the vigil at the state capitol. And we heard inspired and also inspiring words from people who are doing work every day to make sure immigrants and refugees coming to our communities are safe and that they're welcome, that they know their rights and are given a hand as they seek to find a new place in this country. This is not only necessary, it is right, and it is what it means to be an American. We welcome the stranger. We're living in troubled times in this country. It is imperative that people of goodwill, all of you here, come together to challenge unjust, inhumane acts perpetuated in our name at the border, to protest, to march, to stand in vigils, upholding the humanity of all of those, especially the children who come to our shores and to our borders. Now tonight we're not going to be talking about political issues, and of course those are numerous. We see them every day in the paper. Today we're going to be focusing on groups doing this welcoming work at the border and in our own community, right here in Olympia and Thurston County. And we will be finding some ways, learning about some ways you can be part of this vital, life-saving work. Ways we can live into those words by the poet Emma Lazarus, etched onto the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. Send these a homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. So let each of us continue to lift that lamp. So now.
Good evening. I'm Suna Todd, and I'm so honored to be invited to speak at this event for such an important cause. I'm part of the Strengthening Sanctuary group, and I'm also a member of St. Mark's Episcopal in Seattle, where we have someone in sanctuary right now. But I'm here to talk about the opportunity that I had to go to the border in McAllen, Texas for a week in March to volunteer. And I volunteered at the Humanitarian Respite Center, and it is operated by Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley. And the trip was organized by Holy Family Church in Kirkland, and it's a Roman Catholic church. It's very large, and this was their third mission trip down there. So there were 17 of us who went. Some were members of that church, and some, like myself, just took the opportunity to go along. So the Humanitarian Respite Center is in an old, dilapidated nursing home in McAllen, Texas. Clearly it had not been used for quite a long time. It had 16 small rooms. It had very inadequate plumbing. It had no bathrooms in the facility. There were only mats on the floor for sleeping and folding chairs. There were several outbuildings to house a clinic, a laundry with one functioning commercial washer and dryer. There were plywood stalls that had been constructed, so there were 4 toilets and 1 sink. The Salvation Army had donated a trailer with showers in it, 8 showers, I believe. It had to be plumbed directly into the sewer line. It was quite something. The facility was far from adequate, but this staff there was making it work. The city had given the respite center 90 days to vacate because it was in a purely residential area, just houses. And the city was working to find a new location for them, and that has happened. So last month they moved close to the bus station in a facility that it's an upgrade. So the center served 450 to 700 people every day every day. Only families were served there, and it was staffed by 4 people, a nun and 3 of her staff, and the rest was volunteers. So the process is that people were brought to the Humanitarian Respite Center all day long, and sometimes into the night, by Customs and Border Protection. So these were folks who had been in detention, and they were being brought to the respite center. They were released. So they came in on Greyhound-sized buses, prison buses. So you can see why this would be a problem in the residential area. I think the people stuck pretty close inside the facility, but just the buses could be a problem. So yes, it served only families. Single men went somewhere else, single women, Brownsville, just families. So at the center, they were given just a really basic hygiene kit. They are given some food. The food had to be prepared elsewhere because they just didn't have the cooking facilities. But this community, I mean, McAllen is 142,000 people. This community had stepped up, and they were doing all the meals for this center in that community, day in, day out. It was usually soup, you know, simple things, but it was hot, and they were doing it every day. The people had a chance to take a shower and get clean clothes. But one of the most important functions of the center was to help people confirm their travel arrangements and get that squared away. Most of the people were only there a day or 2. So they contact their family or sponsors or, you know, wherever they're going to go. Then that family or sponsor has to make payment or confirm payment to the bus company or, in some cases, airline. Once that's confirmed, then the people can go to the bus station or go to the airport and be on their way. So the center had a van. They would take people all day long to the bus station and occasionally the airport. There was a loudspeaker where they would announce the names of the people who were ready to go, and that was like going all the time, and everybody's always like listening for their name, listening for their name. When people go, they get a snack bag. And everybody gets 2 bottles of water, 4 sandwiches, and a few little snacks like goldfish crackers. And that's what they have until they reach their destination, which could have been anywhere in the country. People were going to Connecticut and Minnesota and wherever family was. Then when they go to the bus station, there's another group of volunteers who work with them, and that's Angry Tias and Abuelas. You may have heard of them. And they're at the bus station all the time, and they all speak Spanish. They help the folks get on the right bus, and maybe they help provide some information about where they're going. Sometimes people have no idea what it's like in Connecticut. Is it going to be hot? Is it going to be cold? So they're really important. The people that were being served were largely from Guatemala. I think there was a very much smaller group from Honduras. I think the children, my estimate would be that they were mostly between 2 and 12 years old. Everyone was very, very tired, and I think likely trauma victims. But most of the people were really quick to return a smile or a greeting, you know, from the volunteers and from the staff. The children were remarkably well behaved. And overall, I thought, given the number of people that were there, it was just remarkably quiet. A number of the children appeared to be unwell. Dehydration was a huge problem. Respiratory infections obviously were real prevalent. There was no doctor on site at the respite center. there was a doctor who was available on call, but the little clinic was staffed by whatever volunteer had the most training, or any volunteer that had the most training. It could be a nurse, an EMT, somebody with first aid card. So while I was there, we had a nurse, fortunately. And, you know, I wanted to say that I feel very sure that we were seeing families. I've heard all kinds of like things that these are trafficked children and they're recycled and people just use them to come to this country. But you know, I saw people caring for their children, holding them while they napped. I mean, I watched a dad that, I think he held that little boy 3 hours in a folding chair, helping them to the bathroom and get their clothes and their food. I feel sure that it was families. I think the conditions were far from adequate, but Sister Ann and her staff were doing heroic, probably saintly work to provide a desperately needed service. And they are so dependent on volunteers to do much of the work. You get at the most 30-minute orientation or training, and then you just like step up to do what you think you can do, and you do what Sister Ann tells you to do. So that's a cardinal rule. I worked with a priest and a lay minister, and our job was to clean the toilets and do the laundry, which is basically towels. But for 700 people, that's a lot of towels. So the Father Bob had recently spent 12 years in Cambodia, and both he and the lay missionary had been in Tanzania. So they tackled cleaning toilets with enthusiasm and a level of professionalism that I could only dream of. While I was there was a group of folks from a Presbyterian church in North Texas. There were some local people that volunteered there almost full time. There was a group from, Salesforce. It's a company that makes time available for their employees to go do charitable work, and they collect their salary while they're doing it. These young people were truly inspiring. I think it's just totally amazing that the sister and her very small staff and the volunteers can even make this happen. But, you know, I think it's such a critical service, and everyone works together. And, you know, I think the services provided, that helps get the people where they're going to go, and the people are shown love and concern. It's so important. And I believe that we're all called upon to see and to care for and to love our neighbors. And thank you for being here tonight.
I did have the experience of seeing one of these immigration advocates having to talk to a 2-year-old about know your rights, and that was heartbreaking. These children don't understand what we're saying to them.
So locking up innocent children and their parents is not making us safer. I'm a pediatrician, but I'm also a mother. I have a 3-year-old child, and I cannot imagine being separated from her forcibly.
There was a feeling of desperation and of profound sadness that we knew how to help them and that it wasn't happening, that our government sanctioned this behavior, which really amounted to government-sanctioned child abuse.
My name is Alejandra Hunt. Can you hear me? Okay. And thank you for being here tonight. And I'm here to tell you about a story the story of Vilma. And we here in Olympia are part of her story. Vilma, we met Vilma last year when the separation of children and parents began. Vilma was one of the first families separated last year from her son. Vilma is from Guatemala, and she came fleeing for her life. So her story began in her town. It's a village in Guatemala that at the time when these the terrible things that happened to her family, her country is in turmoil, and her husband was killed. He was a teacher, and they at that time were on strike. The teachers had a strike, a national strike. And Vilma and her husband are indigenous of the region. And in Guatemala, it's also, there are prejudices against indigenous people. So if you are mestizo, like me, then you have rights for the better jobs. So he had a teacher degree. He taught for about a few years, but then after a while, the jobs for teaching were no longer available for him. So he had to go back and be a farmer. So when a friend of his came and said, you know, right now there's opportunities to go teach. You should go to the main city and see if you can get a job because they need teachers. So on his way to get a job or try to find a job, because obviously now they're in strike and there's union strike, he was killed. He was beaten to death. He had all his paperwork, all his diplomas, and everything from where he taught before, and it was gone. They took everything that he had. So he was alive for 2 days and was able to tell them that he wasn't robbed. It was just everything that he had was taken from him. 2 days later, Vilma knocked at her house, and people were harassing her, and it was a violent encounter. And the next day, she has 3 children. She has a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And she had to make a very difficult decision. And she was going to take her children and go to the next village where friends and family were. And 3 days later, they found her, and again, were looking for her, knocking at the door, waiting for her in different areas. So she found herself in a place where she thought that if she stayed, she might have been killed as well. And so she had to make a decision to leave the country. And she knew that her 3-year-old couldn't make the journey. So her 13-year-old stayed in Guatemala and said, Mama, I'll stay and I'll take care of my brother. You take Sergio, which is the 11-year-old. And they went on a journey. It took them 2.5 months to get here to the border. And she only had $250. She sold everything she had. And when she arrived to the border to present herself to seek asylum, she was among the first families separated. Then she was incarcerated in one area, and her son went to a different area. And the reason why we know this story is because Stephanie Powell, the attorney that I work for, she volunteered with NIRP, the Northwest Immigrant Right Project. And I don't know if you remember last year when they have moved a lot of the detainees from Texas to Washington, to Seattle. She was first at the federal prison, Then she was moved to the detention center, the immigration detention center. And so we were volunteering, listening to stories, letting people know about what the asylum process was, and she was able to take one case, and that was Vilma's case, Vilma's story. Then how we became part of the story is because it was almost like a miraculous thing that happened. To be able to qualify for bond to be released, you have to have a family member. It typically is family that will support you, that will say that they go to the judge and say, here is how much we make. This is the house where she's gonna live. We're gonna support her, and they assess if they are actually able to support this family or this person, and then they make the decision to let them go to the family out on bond. And so Vilma didn't have anybody here, anybody that would be able to support her, to help her. And Stephanie Powell, the credit to her, we are part of the Strengthening Sanctuary group. And so the idea was to get support from the group. So Stephanie asked people who wanted to support Vilma, and so we got about 25 letters or 26 letters of support, offering housing, offering money, offering a way for her so that the judge could see that when she gets out, she would have a support, that she's not going to be a burden to anybody, to the government, really. And at first, we were not sure that she actually had a shot at actually have been qualified for asylum, because to qualify for asylum is a high bar. You have to prove that you are in danger. You have to prove that it's not only tell a story, but you have to have proof of what you're saying. And so when we first met Vilma, she obviously didn't trust us very much. It took us a couple of times to keep going to the detention center and talking to her. And when she realized that we were there to help her, she started telling us little bit by little bit by little bit. And she started with the story about how her husband was killed. But still, having your husband killed is not really qualify you for asylum. Many people's husband die and you don't qualify. So we thought there's probably more to the story, and we just don't know that yet. So little by little, the third day we came in, and she was saying that it was that there was turmoil all over the country, but she wasn't sure what it was that was happening. She didn't realize there was a strike, a union strike. She didn't know that they were, the union actually was going to the towns and closing towns so people couldn't get in and out of the towns. She didn't know, she only knew that the kids were not going to school, but wasn't sure what was really happening nationally. Why was this happening? And we would have never found out what was happening, because we tried to we were doing research about what's happening in Guatemala right now that it's causing this issue. All the media or anything that we looked in English didn't have anything. Then I thought, well, we should probably look in Spanish, see what's happening in the Spanish media. And that's when we find out that this huge strike was happening. They had kind of bargaining with the government, and the government was not doing what they said they had in their contract, so they were stopping everything. And so that made a big difference for Vilma. But we knew the story, but we couldn't tell Vilma the story. She needed to tell us the story. So little by little, she started to figure out what a friend came to talk to her husband, and it was she was discovering her own story as she felt comfortable talking about it. After also, I think that a big part of her being able to see with different eyes the story, it was after she could talk to her son. She knew where she was. She didn't know for about 3 months where he was. Later, when we started seeing her, we figured out where he was and were able to have a contact with him. The big issue is that you need money to be able to call. He needs money and she needs money. So we were able to give her money to call. And I say we, but really Stephanie did all the work. And we needed somebody to help Sergio over there to get him money so that they could talk. So we were able to have some contacts, and it's a lot of people working together to get this family together, to get mother and son to be able to actually talk on the phone and be able to say, you know, Sergio was saying, "Mama, I'm okay." He was giving her words of strength. He is an amazing little boy, and he already had the pain of having lost his dad a few months before, and there he was for his mom. And after she was able to speak with him and feel a little bit like, there are people that care about me. They are not against me. She thought that we were all against them, her, you know, as people, as immigrants. And when she realized that there are people that care, her whole demeanor, her whole face changed. She was able to actually think about what was that it was happening. For a long time, she said she was just in a fog of pain. Those were her words. She was in a fog of pain because she didn't know if she would see her son again. She didn't know how she was going to be able to get out. She didn't know if, she had no idea what was happening. And so as she was able to trust us and be able to tell her story more, we find out about the unions and for her a possible way to asylum. You know, when it's not just a random thing, it was a targeted thing for a reason that political or otherwise. But then the hard part was, is the judge actually going to let her go? Is the judge going to give her a bond? Is the judge going to say, I'm going to take these people that have come together and I'm going to trust that they are going to take care of you? He was not, the big thing, it was that judge were not giving bonds out. They were not letting people go, even if they have family members that could be there for them or support them. But the day of the bond came, and we showed up with a big stack of letters and papers, and just with hope. That's all we had, the hope that maybe he would agree that she could come, get bond and go reunite with her son. And the judge, after listening to Stephanie for a while and asked many questions and making sure that he wanted pictures of the house where she's gonna stay, he wanted pictures, and he wanted the letters from the people, the affidavit with pictures and IDs, and he agreed. And it was like a miracle because he was denying every single person. And he agreed that day that she was gonna get bond. And then he said $30,000 bond. And so we were very lucky that the NIRP, Northwest Immigrant Rights Projects, there is a person that was an anonymous donor who was making available bond money for people. So 24 hours later, Vilma was able to come out of the detention center. And in 24 hours later, she reunited with her son, who almost at the same time as she was released, he was released, except he was in Texas. So all she could do is to think about going back home to be reunited with her son. But we here in Olympia, we are still helping Vilma. We are still part of her story. And right now she's waiting for a court date to see the judge to see about if she's gonna get asylum or not. But we are still helping her monetarily. We send money to Texas to her because she obviously doesn't have a work permit. She doesn't have a way to live. There is an organization that received her in Texas because she was one of the first people that was separated. There was this organization in Texas that was able to help her, and they helped her the first 6 months with rent. And we were send money for food, for other. Also, she's also taking care of her kids in Guatemala. So a little bit that she sends to Guatemala for her kids who are with her dad and her aunt, their aunt, her sister. So if you want to take action and be part of something real, that story that affects real people's lives, I invite you to help Vilma. She is part of our story. She is what we help her to, that there's thousands of people that don't have the opportunity, but she was able to do it, and we were part of that. And I invite you to be part of that. She still needs help, support. I'm still in contact with her all the time, and as well as other people in the community. She wants to come back to Texas as soon as to Washington as soon as her court date is done. Her process is at least finished in that step. She wants to come back to Washington because she says these are her people. These are the people that have opened up to her arms and or wallets or to help her. Without our support, she would not be here anymore. I don't know what would have happened. Probably go back to Guatemala. Who knows what would have happened to her and her child. So I think if you want to make something really palpable and real, I invite you to help Vilma. And I think, I don't know, are we going to see a little video of? Okay, great. Thank you.
Y cuando crucé el río en balsa, me entregué a la migración. Y a la migración, ahí entramos, me sacaron mi dato, me preguntaron cuántos años tenía y por qué vine acá. Y yo les conté que por amenaza, que han matado a mi esposa allá en Guatemala y que, bueno, sacaron todas esas informaciones y luego me separaron de mi niño. Llevaron en otro lugar mi niño, en otra celda, y en la otra celda me quedé yo. Y yo pensé que solo un día, 2 días pues vamos a estar ahí, no. Pues yo soy Vilma Araceli López Juco. Soy de Guatemala. Yo tengo 3 niños. Uno tiene 14 años, el otro tiene 12 años y el otro tiene 3 añitos. Yo iba a traer mi hijo, el más grandecito, pero él me dijo, no mamá, llévate mi hermano Sergio, porque yo me voy a quedar a cuidar a mi hermanito, el más pequeño, me dijo mi hijo. Éramos como 90 madres separados de sus niños. Y llegamos allá en Washington. Yo pensé que en una detención nos iban a dejar, sino que allá nos fueron a meter en la cárcel federal. Tuvimos como 17 días y yo pensaba por mi niño, ¿dónde estará mi niño? ¿Qué estará haciendo? Si se duerme bien, si come bien mi hijo, o estaría sufriendo como estoy sufriendo yo, decía yo. Hasta que cuando llegó Stephanie como mi abogada de sacarme allá en esa detención, ella hizo, hasta ahí tuve que hablar 2 veces a mi niño. Y cuando yo le hablé a mi niño, por primera vez me dijo mi niño, mamá, me dijo, ¿dónde estás? Yo sí estoy muy triste, mamá, me dice mi niño, me empieza a llorar a mi niño. Mamá, siéntase feliz ahí, me dijo. No tenga pena, mamá, me dijo, de salir tenemos que salir, me dijo. Solo confía en Dios.
I couldn't believe it. I had never seen anything like that. There was something just visceral about it. This couldn't be right. This can't be happening. It just cannot be that in this country the government is taking away children and no one knows where they are. No one knows what conditions they're being held in. And no one knows, and there's no plan, no clear plan, and maybe no plan at all for getting them back together with their children.
What I saw this past summer was a crisis that was manufactured by our government. And the thought of violating our own laws to allow asylum seekers to seek protection in our country and to rip families apart. I was concerned for our democracy, I was concerned for our rule of law, and obviously concerned for the families.
And it hit us early on. If we didn't capture this information, the name of the child, their date of birth, the country of origin, no one would know that they were separated from their mom or their dad. And we were only covering one city in McAllen, because that's all we had capacity for. But no one else in the country had the access that we had to the courtroom and to these families. For the ones that we were able to interview, almost 400 of them, we have their names. We know they were traveling together as a family unit. And if the father or the mother is deported without their child, we know that because we were doing this work.
Cuando yo me reuní con mi niño y yo me sentía muy feliz al ver mi niño, hasta incluso lloró mi niño delante de mí en mis brazos cuando él me vio, porque se sentía muy feliz y él decía que tenía por mente tal vez ya no lo voy a ver mi mami. Pero la verdad que por sus ayudas de ustedes, mis abogados, estoy muy feliz con ustedes, muy agradecido y espero en Dios que esta organización que está en Texas, que me puedan apoyar más adelante.
Some of the biggest challenges in a case like Vilma are just making sure that there are legal partners who are going to be strong advocates throughout the immigration process. I met Vilma in person in Houston. I took a trip there to accompany her to some legal meetings with KIND, an organization that we partner with, Kids in Need of Defense, and also with Human Rights First.
Algún día yo conseguiría un trabajo donde para poderlos sacarlos adelante mis niños, porque yo quiero que saco adelante mis niños, ponerlos a estudiar, porque quien por mis niños ya no tienen padre, ya solo me quedé sola.
What's inspiring is her ability to move forward, her laser focus on making sure her son Sergio has access to a good education, who has a soccer ball so he can go outside and play and be a normal kid. That is the sort of life that we want to be holding out as Americans, a sort of value and the ability to achieve dreams. In working with Vilma, I'm just so humbled and grateful that she allows us to partner with her and to walk this journey together.
It's critical that we continue doing this work because as long as zero tolerance stays in place, asylum seekers and refugees are continuing to be criminalized. People coming to this country seeking asylum and protection being charged with a crime just for seeking that protection. And we're going to do everything in our power to keep documenting that and to keep fighting that until zero tolerance goes away.
Esta historia, este problema que nos ha pasado, se queda como una historia en la vida que no es borrable. Pues por la gracia de Dios ahorita estoy bien. Voy a luchar por mis niños para sacarlos adelante, porque algún día van a tener un buen futuro mis niños.
Our next person speaking of her experience at the border just recently, last few months, Naki Stevens.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. I feel this is a very important evening, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you. And really, it's not about me and my story. It's about what we can all do to help. This quote here has a bit of a Christian slant, I admit. That's my historic faith tradition, which is why it ended up there. But I want to make the point that every single solitary faith tradition in the entire world has the same core of compassion, kindness, and welcoming the stranger. See if I can manage to operate this thing without screwing up. So I too was so upset by the separation of children from their parents that I decided I just had to go to the border and stop it. So I worked with my Quaker meeting. I see some Quakes here tonight. And was able to raise several $1,000s just in the space of, maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And during that period, I hooked up with Border Angels, which is a wonderful organization. Its main office is in San Diego. It also has an office in Tijuana. And these are 2 angels. Hugo Castro is who took me over the border into Tijuana. And he's with Maria Gayen, who operates in Tijuana, operates a day center for deportees. And I met them at a Border Angels fundraising breakfast, February 15th. And boom, right after the breakfast, off we went to go over the border and bring supplies. And then down there, buy supplies. I've never quite loved shopping, but this was actually kind of fun. We had 3 or 4 giant carts. And Border Angels in Tijuana has one shelter that it rents and operates itself, and they also provision 9 other shelters. And so we were shopping this first day for two of the shelters. And this is the one that they run. It's in Tijuana, right literally on the beach, and it hosts about, I think it was 22 people, and these are the accommodations. So those aren't even really bunk beds, those are just kind of little slots. And their location, as I say, is right on the beach, and it's right next to the wall, which was built, I think, about in 1980. And you may have seen the photographs of the wall jutting out into the Pacific Ocean. That's right here. The second shelter we went to that day is in a church, Embajaderos de Jesus, and they host 150 people. And this tents in the sanctuary, providing a little bit of privacy. And about half of the folks, they were all families, about half from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and half from Haiti. And something I really didn't have a clue to was that there's a huge immigrant and refugee population of Haitians in Tijuana. And they are, for the last 18 months or so, the Haitians especially are very leery of even trying to get over the border into the U.S., which of course what was their original goal, leaving their country after the earthquake and hurricanes and all the rest of it, because they're so afraid not only will they be deported, they'll be deported back to Haiti. That was one day. I went back a second time, and this is the third shelter. And I asked Hugo, so how does Border Angels decide which shelters to provision? And he said that they provide supplies to the ones that really are the most vulnerable, that it's hard for them to raise money to get food and water and other supplies. And I asked about what was the story with this one, and he said it's unaccompanied minors, and the shelter director is a trans woman. And so these shelters don't get a penny from the government. It's all from nonprofits, from churches and whatnot. And being a trans woman, is kind of a no-no down, lots of places, needless to say. That is why this shelter is so vulnerable to, not having enough food and water. And this is looking into where, where people sleep. And the last shelter I went to was for adult men, and this is the bunk room that they were in. And there were some older ones there in their 70s, and one of them was so depressed he just never got out of his bunk bed. And I didn't realize when I took this picture, and I had permission to take every single picture that I took, that actually he's in there. They told me that afterwards. But again, you can see they have so little. And I went down a fourth day, or third day, and I visited with Maria, who runs a day center for deportees. And many of the deportees she works with are veterans of the United States of America military services who were promised a path to citizenship when they were recruited. And once they were in the service, they never heard about it again. They never received any help, nothing. And then they get out of the service and they get thrown back into Mexico. And lots of them don't speak Spanish. So Maria has language classes, and actually this one, she helps them get papers, identification, because when they come down, the Border Patrol takes everything from them, and including their clothes and their papers. And Maria here is showing me how they arrive at the border. Her place is right across the plaza from where these folks are dumped. They arrive in sweatpants, and the Border Patrol takes their clothes and gives them sweatpants, which makes them totally identifiable and an absolute target. And Tijuana is one of the most dangerous, murder capitals of the world. So she, the first thing she does is she gets them out of those sweatpants and gives them clothes. So that was my experience. It was humbling, it was appalling, it was uplifting. The people were so gracious and so thankful. And I felt like I was the stranger being welcomed. That's how, mutual love, basically. And looking forward, I'm just so excited. When I came back, I did some presentations like this, and came up with a little group of people who, actually there are two co-conspirators here tonight, Jody Smith and Leslie Cushman. I don't know if any of the others are. And we're starting a project here in Olympia that we just today named Shelter Promise, Food, Water, and Hope to the Border. And what we're looking to do that you all can help with is raise money that we can send through Border Angels to these shelters so they have a predictable, dependable, reliable flow of money to buy food and water and other supplies. And we set a goal of getting 1,000 individuals and organizations, congregations, to donate $10 a month, which would be $10,000 a month. And Hugo Castro at Border Angels is going to take the money over the border and buy food and supplies for these shelters.
Border Angels shelters are all south of the border.
Yeah, they're all in Tijuana.
So they're all the people who are waiting to get in.
Yeah, thank you.
Kicked out.
Thank you, and I'm really glad you asked that question. Exactly right. There are people who are wanting to get into the asylum, wanting to go to the U.S. to apply for asylum. And so this problem is going to be even worse based on what happened today, which is that I know we're not to talk politics, but who has now promulgated a rule that won't allow for asylum anymore, basically. That's what it comes down to. So more and more people coming up are going to get stuck in these shelters in Mexico. And when I was emailing back and forth recently in the last couple of weeks, Hugo told me that when I was there in February, there were 20 shelters. And as of 2 weeks ago, roughly, there are now 31. And the church that I showed you, I was able to provide money for them to buy materials and build bunk beds for this new shelter that they had built right sort of next to the church. And as it turned out, the government wouldn't let them build the bunk beds because they're made of wood and there's some ordinance or something. So what they did instead was build an addition onto that new shelter that they had put together. And I got a note from the pastor there about 2 weeks ago, and he said last Friday we finished the construction of the addition and we opened the shelter, and by midnight it was over. The new part was overflowing. So there is just a tremendous need. So thank you for asking that question.
The second part of that is how supportive is the government of Mexico for what you're doing or what anybody is doing as far as providing shelter?
No. They're not.
Repeat the question.
Right. So question being, is the government participating in any way at any level in Mexico in helping these shelters? And the answer is no. These shelters are all supported by churches, individuals, civic groups. So it's very random when seemingly anyway, when they get provisioned. And so our idea is to, provide however many shelters we can. I'm not sure now how many that might be, but with a reliable, dependable, predictable amount of money every single month so they can plan and they could know how much more they have to get, or whether they can, spend more time developing their education program for the kids. So, any more questions? Yeah.
I don't want to get political, but, with climate change, I see many of these issues getting worse. So I see the need being more. What do you see from being down there? And it's not just climate change. We all here know what's going on.
So the comment is that it looks like due to climate change and other events that the need will just continue to grow. I think that's what you were, and I couldn't agree more.
You probably know more than somebody like me. I haven't been to the border.
Well, just the fact that in February there were 20 shelters and in July there were 31. I mean, that sort of says it all, and that the new one at the church just overflowed in 6 hours. So, one more question.
I was just wondering if there's any kind of move by the Mexican government to collect these refugees or deport them to their home countries. Are these shelters that are giving us, a place to rest to the refugees? Are they being targeted by military police or whatever their version of Homeland Security is? Are people vulnerable because they're going to these shelters?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question is, are people in the shelters exposing themselves to possible deportation by the Mexican authorities to, their home countries? I don't know the answer to that. I have a feeling no, just because I think I would have, in my conversations back and forth with Ugo especially, I think he probably would have said that, but I think that's a really insightful. You have to wonder. Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it.
You can see that many of these programs, whether it's the Catholic Charities and their humanitarian work at the border or Border Angels, all of these have a similar thing in helping people who are extremely vulnerable. I want to mention just a couple of programs with which I'm very familiar. They happen to be run by Unitarian Universalist, or out of Unitarian Universalist churches. First is No More Deaths. Perhaps you've heard of them. They've been in the paper recently. Some of their volunteers, what they do, they've been around since 2004. And they're volunteers heading out of Tucson and that area, go into the Sonoran Desert, leaving supplies, water, and so on for people crossing that very dangerous border. In fact, their highlight of their border crossing aid is always June 21st, the summer solstice, the longest day, and when they expect that extremely hot weather. So they've been doing this for 15 years, and recently they've been arrested. Women have been arrested. A doctor who provided aid was arrested and tried. He was actually acquitted, but the state is bringing, and kind of a variety of charges from both federal and state, and the state is continuing to pursue charges against that doctor, even though he was acquitted on those charges. So no more deaths. I've been involved, or supporting them, I should say, probably for the last 5 years, ever since I first learned about them, and put out a newsletter with stories like this. It's not only Unitarian Universalists, but it is headquartered at our Tucson church. The second one is one I just learned about last month. We were at our national conference, Unitarian Universalist Association conference in Spokane. I just happened to sit at a table with a woman from Santa Fe. And her church, she was actually heading programs helping transgender women coming out of, she called pods, in other words, separate detention facilities. So their church is working with transgender women and helping them, providing funds, some supplies, and so on to help them go on to their next place. And these transgender women are delivered to them by ICE officials, kind of on a haphazard schedule, and then they help them out and help them move on to the next location. But the woman, Mary Ellen Gonzalez in Santa Fe, said, what you really need to talk to are the people doing the program at our church in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So she put me in touch with them, and just today I received a letter from a member of their church down there, their justice program, who writes, when the refugees arrive here in Las Cruces, they are hungry, frightened, and many have health problems after their long journey to the U.S. and their struggles in detention. It takes about $100 per family to feed, provide a change of clothes, and a little nursing care. To give an idea of the need that we are facing, from April 12th to the end of June, Las Cruces hospitality centers, and by the way, it's not just the UUs, the Lutherans, the Catholics, and other denominations help too. The hospitality centers from April to June assisted over 10,000 refugees. Over 70 of our members, she's writing of the UU Church, have partnered with Peace Lutheran Church on a regular basis to feed and house refugees and families that are arriving at the church weekly, dropped off by ICE or Border Patrol agents. When they arrive, about 30 at a time, they receive a warm shower, a clean set of clothes, a meal, and a good night's sleep on inflated air mattresses, which are a luxury after sleeping on concrete floors in the detention centers. Over the next day or two, as transportation becomes available for them to travel to their host families across the country, they leave with a small nylon backpack filled with sack lunches and hygiene products to get them through their travels, similar to what Suna spoke about. So these are just two more programs, and as I say, this happens to be my own denomination, but we're doing this in collaboration with every other denomination, and I'm sure those of you from other religious communities, other faith communities, are doing exactly the same thing, supporting your people who are working on the borders. And we'll be talking more at the end here how we can support these fabulous programs that are going on, not only in other parts of the country and on the border, but also right here in Olympia and Thurston County. So, in fact, it's time to hear about some of our local organizations. One of them is Strengthening Sanctuary. And Kathy, we're going to tag team on this, I think. Okay, Sherry Sullivan and Kathy Barrows-Fried too. They're both involved in both these organizations, so you'll learn all about them.
Right. This is quite overwhelming, I think. I appreciate so much your coming and listening to these stories. And really the goal, the purpose of this gathering is to provide you with a range of opportunities to act. So many of us feel horrified and paralyzed and disempowered. This is not our country. This is not our government. This is not who we are. But what can we do? I think when we come together, there's a sense of empowerment that we can do something. We can do something individually. And as you hear, there's this kind of multi-layered possibility of connection. You can engage with an organization that is doing something, whether it's locally or close to the border, at the border, on the other side of the border, or like in Vilma's case, is all of the above. Or you can, as an individual, or both and, you can, as an individual, volunteer or provide financial resources that others can put to use. So listening to all these options, listen to your heart and what calls your name, and reflect on where you want to put your energy, your time, your efforts, or your financial resources. One of the possibilities, obviously, that I'm representing here is Cielo, and you may know well about Cielo. It's been around since 1996. It's now in a kind of extension of the Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd right across North Street from Olympia High School field, athletic field. And they called us to move there from our former digs on Black Lake Boulevard because part of their mission is, in their particular branch of the Lutheran Church, is to serve immigrants and refugees. And they wanted, these quarters became available, and they wanted to enhance their efforts, strengthen their efforts to reach out and do the work that their mission calls them to do. So it's been a wonderful partnering. And what we offer is services, wraparound holistic services to immigrants here in South Puget Sound in 4-county area. We're the only bicultural, bilingual organization in the area. And we offer educational services, and you can take our pamphlet and see all about those, everything from English to computer to sewing to GED in Spanish and Spanish education for adults, and also homework tutoring for kids, their kids, and preschool activities to help prepare the youngest for kindergarten and try to create the opportunities that don't exist fully in the school system. We have a program for serving and supporting and advocating for victims of crime of all kinds, but particularly domestic violence and sexual assault. And in our Shelton office, expanded there in the last 2 years, we actually have two young women from the Guatemalan community who advocate in 2 indigenous languages. So we're able to serve Guatemalan population in Mason County. And we have a mental health program, Proyecto Familia, which has long offered counseling and mental health services, but recently expanded and has partnered with the University of Washington to bring interns from various mental health social service programs to Cielo, who are eager to get the experience of working with the community we serve. They may be bilingual or not, frequently are, but that's a broadening and growing service, and it serves, we're the only ones who serve immigrants who have no documentation and cannot receive mental health services in any other way. So the education program has an ongoing and an urgent need starting in September for volunteers at every level of their services. But there are other ways, and certainly donation, financial donation to support, especially the education program, is more than welcome. And we work closely with Strengthening Sanctuary, who are our kind of troops in the community, the advocacy out, and it's not like they're subordinate. It's like we are partners, and we could not do what we do as effectively and reach the people we're trying to reach, particularly allies in the community, and the kind of social justice changes that are our ultimate goal, change the system. And I want to pass the baton to Kathy Barles-Freed to talk about Strengthening Sanctuary briefly.
Thank you. What a swell introduction, because that's exactly why I wanted Cielo to go first and Sherry to go first, in that we do work together. We have a flyer out there that talks about all the ways to get involved with Strengthening Sanctuary, and on the flip side is all of the work that Cielo does. Because if we go out there and we generate some activity and some interest and provide some resources, and we can have wonderful packages about know your rights, but how do we get it to the people that need it? You know, having a little presentation sitting on, Capitol Way is not going to do it. So connecting through a facility and organization like Cielo, which is a place of comfort and trust and history, and immigrants have confidence that they'll be safe there. People talk their language there, not just Spanish, but these indigenous languages as well. And so making that connection so that we stir the pot and then help them get to a place where they can actually have some services. So we would not have a purpose in life if it were not for Cielo to help carry that out. So Strengthening Sanctuary. There's a flyer out there, and it has Strengthening Sanctuary stuff on the front end and Cielo stuff on the back end, because we are one. And Strengthening Sanctuary is at one time an incredibly complex, dense, confusing organization. And on the other hand, incredibly simple. It's dense because the issues, as you've gotten a sampling of here tonight, are so complex and so overwhelming and so legalistic, some of it. And the financial demands could be draining. It could be just like, how do I even cope with this? And I think today was a good example of that. I was mentioning to somebody this morning, I was reading the headlines, and was talking about the latest decision to stop the asylum seekers coming in. And it happened to coincide when there was the TV going on. I always have certain stations on. And it was reviewing that once again, law enforcement officers was not held culpable in the Eric Garner death. And he was saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And that's how I felt in the moment. It's like, one more thing. One more thing, these asylum seekers that are coming to a country that says, bring your huddled masses, like really? I mean, I felt like I was just choking. It's overwhelming, and that's why something like Strengthening Sanctuary is like, if you feel overwhelmed, come join us, because we are overwhelmed at every single meeting, I promise you. Because there's so much to do, and many of us are gray-haired, and there's a capacity issue. There's a capacity around your energy level. There's a capacity around your skill set. Wish that my grandparents would force me to speak Spanish, but they were in the era that you can't speak Spanish at home because we were punished when we went to school and we had an accent. We do not want you to encounter what we encountered going to school. So I spoke Spanish to my grandparents because they didn't speak English, but not at home. They didn't want us to have the accent. And what I would do, I would be really dangerous if I could speak Spanish. I really would. Yeah. The reason strengthening sanctuary is complex, because the issues are complex, is there's a whole list of categories in which someone could get involved. Those who want to attack the system and get at those system changes are interested in policy. We're very active in the last legislative session around Keep Washington Working, because immigrants are a vital part of our workforce. We would crumble if we did not have immigrants working, not just in those service industries, but in places just you wouldn't even think about where the undocumented immigrants are there and are working as professionals and service providers and educators and medical people. So if you're interested in the policy piece, there's that group that gets involved in policy. Some of it crosses over because there's policies around education, and the education group work with some policies with OSPI and with superintendents associations to make sure that we discover things like when a child came in to be registered for school, there was a question on the questionnaire that said, what was the country of birth? Why do you need to know the country of birth to register your child for school? You do not. And people just that form was always used. They didn't think about it. Why do you use that information? I don't know what we use it for, but we always ask it, and so there it is. So there are systems that just kind of chug along, and in their process sometimes expose people, expose family, expose children. And so that policy stuff also overlaps to education. Education was really a focus around know your rights, because immigrants are entitled to rights in the Constitution. It doesn't say a citizen, it says persons. Right to be silent, right to have representation. And so having that information available to immigrant communities to know that they have rights and provide training. Again, I can be as well-intended as possible, but I cannot communicate to someone who's Spanish-speaking that they have rights and give them guidance. But we can get with allies, we can be with communities, we can provide the training. And what we have found is working through the education systems, there are teachers that know who those kids are. There are teachers, one who came to me, ELL teacher that said the kids came in to her that morning, a 4th grader and a 7th grader, crying because their father was disappeared off their front porch that morning. He usually went to work, had his coffee cup on the curb. They went out to the bus, the cup was there, the door was open, and the father was gone. Yes, he was picked up and gotten into detention, but because they were from Guatemala, they were afraid a gang had finally tracked him down. He'd been killed. I mean, they were glad to see that at least he was safe and alive. So people in the school system, they knew who their immigrant families are. The Head Start teachers, the ECAP teachers, they know who their families are, and they're Spanish speaking. Yes, ma'am.
Community or our sphere that is vulnerable might need to have information about what their rights are. How would you recommend approaching someone? I talked with Sherry about this a little bit ahead of time, in a way that doesn't make them feel targeted or threatened.
Right.
How would you suggest?
And we had many teachers that say, we can't ask them if they're undocumented, we can't ask them if they're citizens, but there's parents' nights, there's parents' packets, there's information table at Seymour. There's information out there available. Just have little stacks of information about know your rights, little red cards that CLO can provide them. And some of those examples are out on the table. Alejandra?
Or you can also say, here is some know your rights information that if you know somebody that needs it.
Maybe you know someone. Pass it on in case you know somebody. And so just making it available, letting people know it's there. We have one member of our group who had little plastic stands and took the bus and went to Mason County at different places, Mexican grocery stores, and left little stands of know your rights pamphlets and information so people while they were shopping could just pick it up. So she took it upon herself to ride the bus, go to Shelton, walk around to different stores, and put those pamphlets. You want to have something to do? You can't speak Spanish, you're not an attorney? You can ride the bus and deliver these little pamphlets at the Mexican grocery store, yeah? So that's among the kinds of things that Strengthening Sanctuary does. It has all these little fingers, and depending on what the person's interest is, their energy level, their time, we have people that are retired and they may be gone traveling for 6 months out of the year, but when they come back those other 6 months, they're fully engaged in whatever category that is. So if you want to know what all those categories are, the list is on the flyer, and that's why it's incredibly dense and complex. It was particularly fresh in my mind because we had a meeting last night. We meet normally 2 times a month, but in the summer we're only meeting once, and the next meeting is August 5th, I think, at St. John's Episcopal Church. And so we had 4 or 5 new people that were at our meeting on Monday because of the Lights for Liberty. They had signed up, they saw the meeting was coming up, and they showed up. So it was the first time they were there, and it happened to be a meeting where we touched on every single one of those topics. And people were reporting in, this is what I've done, this is what happened, this is what's going on, we're gonna meet with the new police chief in Lacey, all these little pieces, well, how do we do this? And they got a sampling of all the stuff that's going on, and I'm sure their heads were spinning about, well, where do I jump in? And so you jump in with where you feel comfortable, and sometimes you check that out and go there, help us table one time, hear the answers to the questions, go with us to one of the trainings, help at Cielo. The Know Your Rights is one way to let the immigrants know that they can have their own independence and authority, and having these conversations with law enforcement. They are not the enemy, and our law enforcement group was able to work with law enforcement organizations so that we were influencing the relationship that law enforcement has with ICE. And I think had a very positive influence so that they actually expressed that they were not going to have an active role. I mean, if someone's a felon, that's a different story, but to not have an active role of connecting and facilitating and making it easy for ICE to meet with one of those individuals who perhaps was undocumented. And I know the Olympia Police Department went the extra step, and they have a little card they give those who are in their jail, lets them know if an ICE officer comes to talk to you, you don't have to talk to them. Now, Olympia Police Department didn't have to initiate that and do that. How did they know to do that? How did they have the language? We gave them the awareness. So a law enforcement group is vigilant. They're on all of it and working with changing policies, behaviors and policies. Because the officer on the street will say, we don't have a policy on that. We don't have a policy that tells us we can't do that. Yes, Alejandra.
I'm sorry, Kathy. I wanted to say the only law enforcement agency that we don't have, that hasn't agreed to not cooperate with ICE is the Thurston County Sheriff's Mesa. So if you have a chance to write him a letter or send him a note saying, hey, we support our immigrants in our community and we like you to not cooperate with ICE. So we appreciate that if you could send them a note. Thank you.
Advocacy. There are lots of different ways and pieces. So capacity, engagement, lots of opportunity to engage. Yes, another question.
I started a program in '75 for the Vietnamese refugees and worked with the International Rescue Committee. And we found sponsors. Now, are we allowed to find sponsors here and vet sponsors? Or do they have to have a relative in the country before they cross the border? That's what I'm hearing. They have to have family members before they are eligible to come into the country? Or can they be sponsored by a family or a church, as we did with the Vietnamese and the Cambodians?
Okay, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I know Alejandra is going to help
we
me
could
with that.
be recruiting sponsor families.
Well,
That's what I did.
the Temple Beth Hatvelo got very active in wanting to create a sanctuary within the temple. And so they spent, I think, nearly a year going through all of the processes so that they could have the full support of the synagogue and all of the congregation members there. And so there was a faith sanctuary group that spun off and do that. We also have, I know, Good Shepherd Church, they are a sanctuary for, what country are they from? There are a couple of churches that have actually brought other individuals in. They're Eastern European, United Methodist. Strengthening Sanctuary itself hasn't gotten involved with that kind of sponsoring other than the situation with Vilma. And in the early meetings, we had many people that wanted our help. But, I mean, you could spend the $60,000 on attorney fees for one family if you could. It's just too huge, and that's not our capacity to do that. So, embracing the one person with whom we had a personal relationship with, like Vilma, is a way for our members to feel like they can do something personally. and but I can't answer your question directly about the how to do, but Alejandra works for Stephanie Powell, who is just immensely wonderful and would be able to answer that question, I'm sure. Yeah, I wish I were an attorney. If I were a Spanish-speaking attorney, I would really be dangerous. So I think that's all about strengthening sanctuary. It's just a way to move from something as personal as Vilma, as writing a letter, to sampling a strengthening sanctuary meeting and testing to see what's a good way to become involved, because we're all enraged. We're enraged and frustrated that there has to be something we can do. How do we stop this thing? And we feel powerless. And so when you look at the big picture like that, it is overwhelming. And I encourage you to find some way to get involved in one of these organizations, and know that when you do something, that is important. You're helping provide the safety network that should be there and being the kind of humane American and Christian and human being that we know we want to be.
On. There it is. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to lose your jewel. Although, Kathy, I'll say you're dangerous in any language. So, as you see, there are quite a variety of ways to help both national groups as well as groups here locally. And on the back of your program are the websites that you can learn more about these organizations. And in case you haven't caught the message, one thing that they really need more than anything else is money, really. They don't need donations of things, because if you're operating out of a church basement, there's no place to put all of that stuff. But they do need money. As that letter from Las Cruces said, they cost about $100 per person when they come through to provide the things that they have. Now, on the back are ways that you can donate, and you can send directly to the organization, all listed there after you've checked their websites. There are some envelopes out on the table. You can put cash or a check in the envelope, and if you would write whether you want to do it Cielo or the Humanitarian Respite Center, just put that on the outside of the envelope, and we will make sure it gets to the person. If you write checks, write a check to OUUC, meaning this church. It's an accountability thing we have. It has to go through our bookkeeping just to make sure that money comes through. But put that check in here and put Humanitarian Respite Center on the envelope. So the check will go through our Faith in Action fund here at the church, but it will be sent by our administrator to these organizations, wherever you wish. Yes, Kathy?
Is that true for Vilma as well? They would write the check to OUC and put
Yeah, and put Vilma. And then would that go to Strengthening Sanctuary? Okay, so you could put it Vilma or just say Strengthening Sanctuary. And yes, Naki.
For Shelter Promise?
Yes.
You wanted
Yeah, I'll do that. Shelter Promise, which as of press time, I didn't have their address. In fact, they just adopted their name right about afternoon today. Shelter Promise is on that, right, Shelter Promise on the front, and those will go, United Churches of Olympia is serving as their financial collector. So, yeah, but, well, you could still put OUUC and put the Promise, and we'll get it to United Churches. I'll straighten it out. I'll be here tomorrow. So all of those resources are on here, and please support them. They're doing vital work, and I know, as Kathy said, we feel helpless when we hear the news that not breathing, it's really true, but we can do a lot if supporting financially and supporting with ourselves, helping, whether it's getting out in our voter registration drive or some of these other wonderful programs that CLO and Strengthening Sanctuary and League of Women Voters and other groups have, so we can all be part of that. But anyway, have lots of good causes here and fabulous people doing wonderful work in this community, and I think we have to always keep that in mind. In closing, I just want to thank all of those who put this program together. It was done very, very quickly. Met, I think, a couple of times with Suna Todd, Miriam Lorch from our church, Sherry Sullivan, and of course, Kathy Barrows-Freed and Alejandra Escueda Hunt, who speak. And so thank you so much, and I have to really give a lot of credit to our tech people back there, Riley McLaughlin, Dorothy Guest. Yeah, thanks a lot for keeping everything on schedule. So I want to close with these words. It is not enough merely to call for freedom, democracy, and human rights. There has to be a united determination to persevere in the struggle, to make sacrifices in the name of enduring truth, to resist corrupting influences, ill will, ignorance, and fear. So may it be. Thank you for being here. Please visit the tables and donate.